Hello students, today we will be discussing mitigation and adaptation. And in this particular lecture module, we will be discussing disaster risk reduction to risk management concept, then concept of resilience, resilience distribution curve, resilient measures, mitigation and its strategies, and adaptation and its strategies. So let us start with the concept of disaster risk reduction. Last time we have actually discussed the definition of disaster risk, how it has evolved, which had taken four different components into its ambit, that is the hazard, vulnerability, exposure, and coping capacity. And here we will find that how with the decades, this entire concept of disaster risk reduction, how to manage it, that has evolved. So 90 to 1999, it was the UN International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. First time, the global attention was shifted from post-disaster response to risk reduction, and it's a very strong shift because response to the post-disaster scenario is age-old system. There is nothing new into it. But these are the new things which came into the 1990, that is decade, International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction, IDNDR. So, reduction of loss of life and property through better knowledge, early warning, and planning were the objectives. In 1994, we find the Yokohama Strategy and Plan of Action for a Safer World. This was adopted in Yokohama, Japan. First comprehensive global policy on DRR we find here. And this strategy introduces concepts of vulnerability, preparedness, early warning, community involvement, etc. way back in 94. In 1999, the UNISDR, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, was created to carry forward the IDNDR outcomes. And then we have the experience of Bhuj earthquake in India, a turning point in DRR. And in this particular 2000 to 2014, we will find two different major things, the DRR awareness to integration with development and the Hyogo framework for action era, that is 2005 to 2014. But there are two important events which actually had been crucial driver for changes which was being brought. First one, as I said, the Bhuj earthquake. This was the foundational event when the realization on that governance and vulnerability are very important and they drive the disaster loss, not only the hazard. That concept was accepted and realized. And in 2004, Indian Ocean tsunami, massive global push to strengthen early warning systems and international coordination for data sharing started coming to the plates. In 2005, we find the Hyogo framework for action, 2005 to 15, which was adopted in Kobe, Japan. You have to remember it was also triggered by another very massive earthquake, 1995 Kobe earthquake, and this was first 10-year global DRR framework we got from the Hyogo. 5 priority of actions were identified: governance, risk identification, knowledge, resilience, preparedness. And we find that in the following years, how this disaster risk reduction concept converted to risk management concept. In the 2006-7 establishment of Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction, GPDRR, was placed. 2004, UNISDR launches the Global Assessment Report on DRR, GAR, biennial thereafter. And it's a continuously happening assessment. 2011, another massive event happened, that is the Tohoku earthquake, followed by massive tsunami. here you can find that cascading hazard events. In 2014, recognition of the slow onset hazards like groundwater depletion, like urban heat, they were being recognized, and technological disaster, these were also being disaster in the DRR discourse. Then the Sendai framework happened. It has a direct alignment with SDGs and Paris Agreement, which had come in the same years. Four priority areas were identified: understanding disaster risk, strengthening risk governance, investing in resilience, and preparedness and build back better. So these were really paradigm shift from the disaster risk reduction towards the risk management. And gradually we can find that 2020, the shift from DRR to integrated risk management and systemic risk understanding has really taken place. Increasing focus on nature-based solution and ecosystem-based DRR, they also came into the place, which will be discussed in later lectures. So once we come back and we can look at this particular disaster management cycle, and we can see that more and more detailing is coming here, and we can see this shift to the pre-event is equally important now like the post-event. So this hazard exposure vulnerability, that relation is continuing, and the disaster event is now being managed post and pre in both. So prevention becomes a very important stage. Concept of resilience, this has a very strong root in this Sendai framework. Concept of resilience is the ability of individuals, community and states and their institutions to absorb and recover from the shocks while positively adapting and transforming their structures and means for living in the face of long-term changes and uncertainty. So that's the way OECD has defined the resilience. If we try to look at this image, you can find that when the disruption is happening, then the society is going towards a problem, and till this point is the absorb point of that shock, and then it is trying to go up, so trying to recover, and then it is adapting and improving further. So that's the way we can see the resilience concept has been captured. This resilience is also discussed by UNDRR. Let us see how the definition has come. The ability of states, communities and households to manage change by maintaining or transforming living standards in the face of shocks or stresses, such as earthquakes, drought, or violent conflict, without compromising their long term prospects. And UNDRR also extended this discussion further. The capacity of a system, community, or society potentially exposed to hazards to adapt by resisting or changing to reach and maintain an acceptable level of functioning and structure. So that's the way UNDRR has unfolded the concept of resilience. Again, another very nice figure to understand this resilience. We are having this as the distribution curve. So distribution curve, you can find it that the curve is having a disruption here. Then that absorptive capacity, it is going down. Then if this much is the absorptive capacity, this is the remaining capacity of the society. Then the resilience will help it to restore. So that will be the restorative path. And then according to the capacity, either it will go down or it will improve further. So that from the previous level. So that's the way this resilience distribution curve provides us idea, and we can also get to know how to really reach that better improved condition. What are the what are the components of this absorptive capacity? Redundancy, robustness, visibility. And the restorative capacity, that is the response and recovery. And then the adaptive capacity, this is the adaptive capacity we have discussed in the previous slide as well. There we need to have the flexibility, agility, collaboration and communication. So that's the way you can read this resilience distribution curve. I would also like to talk about this normal time and the disrupted time. This particular small graph, you can really look at it to understand the handling time, normal time and the disrupted one. This figure illustrates the system's performance over time in response to a disruptive event, showing a decline in performance during the disruption and a subsequent recovery. So try to look at it. We will now discuss the resilient measures. The resilient measures, before going into that, let us see if this is the disaster risk reduction concept. Climate change adaptation is a broader circle and which is within the resilience concept, and the largest concept is the sustainability one. So, within the sustainability context, the resilience, climate change adaptation, mitigation, and DRR is embedded into. So, let us first discuss the sustainability and we will also discuss the DRR. The integration of environmental health, social equity, and economic vitality in order to create thriving, healthy, diverse, and resilient communities for this generation and generations to come. That is the sustainability definition. The practice of sustainability recognizes how these issues are interconnected and requires a system approach and an acknowledgement of complexity. And the subset is disaster risk reduction, which is aimed at preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contribute to strengthening resilience and therefore to the achievement of sustainable development. So, if we don't have this disaster risk being reduced, every time the development will be impacted. So, these strategies and policies for DRR will define the goals and objectives across different timescales and with concrete targets, indicators, and timeframes. This is in line with the Sendai framework to DRR 2015 to 30. So, now we will be discussing based on this idea of DRR resilience that how adaptation and mitigation they help in resilience building. Adaptation, they are the actions to manage the impacts of climate change, whereas mitigation are the actions to reduce emissions that cause the climate change. So, for the climate change, the driver, if the driver is climate change, then the adaptation and mitigation shall be looked like the actions to manage the impacts of climate change and actions to reduce emissions that cause climate change. That's the mitigation. So, that's the way these two are two different strategies towards the resilience building. Mitigation, we'll be discussing mitigation and adaptation both for disaster risk and the climate change. So, in disaster risk, the lessening or minimizing of the adverse impacts of a hazardous event through various strategies and actions are the mitigation strategies. So, mitigation, if we try to look at, we can also try to look at similar concepts like prevention, which aims to avoid the hazard or exposure completely. Preparedness is about the readiness, it's a short term to respond and recover when a hazard occurs. Whereas mitigation is a long term risk reduction, lowering potential losses before the next event. It can reduce hazard intensity or frequency, can directly reduce exposure and can structurally reduce vulnerability, which preparedness cannot do. Mitigation in climate policy: actions or interventions that limit or reduce greenhouse gas emissions from entering the atmosphere and remove existing greenhouse gases, aiming to minimize the causes and the impact of climate change. Mitigation strategies: key mitigation strategies which together form the foundation of a comprehensive mitigation plan for managing and reducing risk, follows a critical event chain. Assume and accept risk is the first link of the chain. What it does, it says that cannot eliminate the hazard. So you accept residual risk but prepare. Second link is the avoidance of risk. Remove people or infrastructure from hazard zones. You avoid. Next one is the controlling risk. Cannot avoid the hazard. You reduce its effects. Transfer of risk. Shift financial risk to others. Monitoring risk. Understanding changes in hazard, vulnerability, and exposure over time. So, these are the 5 links for the critical event chain. And we will be discussing structural and non structural mitigation strategies against these 5 links. So, the event chain logic, which we discussed just now, is the assume and accept risk, avoid risk, control, transfer, and monitor. So, we'll be discussing the structural mitigation, which involves the physical construction to reduce or prevent the impact. Whereas non-structural mitigation measures includes the policies, regulatory measures, behavioral changes, which aim to reduce the negative impacts of the natural hazards. So, let us go for the first link, assume and accept risk, and we'll be discussing the structural mitigation strategies. Any physical construction that reduces or avoids hazard impacts or uses engineering techniques to improve hazard resistance of structures and systems are this particular structural mitigation. Designing buildings with minimum code compliances, elevating critical utilities, simple retrofitting for known weak points, these can be some of the very strong mitigation strategies for assuming and accepting risk, like earthquake resistant design and retrofitting of schools and hospitals, ductile frame, shear walls, and the base isolators. We will be now discussing the second link, that's the avoid risk. Relocating infrastructure away from active floodplains, steep landslide prone zones, tsunami run up zones, etc. Building buffer zones like green belts, coastal dunes, they can help us in avoiding the risk. Next link is the control sea walls, levees, embankments, or retrofitting buildings for earthquake or wind, stormwater drainage system improvement, slope stabilization like retaining walls, terracing, all these are going to help us. All these structural mitigations will help us in controlling the risk. Fourth link, transfer risk. Structural strategies here are few since risk transfer is mostly financial. Installing safety devices that reduce insurance premium like fire suppression systems, flood barriers, they are the structural mitigation strategies for this link. And the final link, that's the monitoring risk, is the sensors installed on dams and bridges, slopes for landslide detection, coastal gauges for the tide and tsunami monitoring, instrumented buildings for shaking, or structural health monitoring. These are the good structural mitigation strategies to monitor the risk. Now let us move to the non-structural mitigation strategies. So the first link we will be discussing is assume and accept, in which the measures are not involving physical construction, but they use knowledge, practice, policies and agreements to reduce disaster risk and impacts. Examples: insurance of assets, awareness that some level of shaking or flooding is normal, maintaining emergency kits, basic land use zoning acknowledgement. These are some non-structural mitigation strategies. For the avoid risk link, land use regulations prohibiting settlements in high risk zones, development control regulations, urban planning decisions that keep vulnerable populations away from hazards. They are good non structural mitigation to avoid risk. Similarly, early warning systems, building codes and enforcement of the same, evacuation plans and signage, community based preparedness drills, environment management like wetlands rehabilitation for floods, etc., will be the ideal examples for non structural mitigation strategies to control risk. Transfer of risk based insurance premiums for property, crop, business interruption, or catastrophe pools or bonds, government private sector risk pooling funds, micro insurance for low income communities, tax incentives for retrofitting, relocation subsidies, compensation schemes. All these instruments change the cost benefit calculation for household, firms, and local governments, steering them towards safer choices. And the final and fifth link is the monitoring risk through information, awareness, and capacity building. Flood forecasting and warning, risk maps, public education, school programs, drills, they are good example of non-structural mitigation strategies. GIS risk mapping, which are updated regularly, real-time hazard monitoring, which many agencies are doing, community level reporting systems, remote sensing to track land use and environmental changes are very good apt examples for non-structural mitigation strategies to monitor risk. So after the mitigation discussion, we will come to the adaptation. So first let us go for the adaptation concept. Here also we will be discussing from the perspective of disaster as well as the climate change. The process of adjusting to actual or expected hazards and their effects in order to moderate harm or to take advantage of beneficial opportunities. That's the adaptation. Again, this adaptation can be confused with coping and resilience. So, let us have a discussion on these three terms. Coping is usually short term, reactive adjustment to keep things going during and just after that event. Whereas resilience is the overall capacity of a system to absorb, recover, and transform in the face of shocks and the stresses. And adaptation sits in between. It is planned, often incremental or transformational, change in policies, infrastructures, or behaviors so that the future hazard impacts become acceptable or even beneficial. So now let's see from the climate side. From that perspective, adaptation is the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects in order to moderate harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. In practice, this includes actions such as redesigning infrastructure standards for higher flood peaks, heat resilient urban design, climate resilient crops, and water management and social protection systems that anticipate climate related shocks. Let us see some variables and the differential adaptation strategies. If the variable is timing, then we are having two different adaptation strategies. Anticipatory, which is proactive, and proactive means before impacts are observed. Another one is responsive, reactive, that is after the event has happened and we have observed the impacts. If we take the variable temporal scope, then the tactical and strategic, one is short term, the other one is long term. Spatial scope, localized, widespread. Actors, public, private. Functional effects like retreat, accommodate, protect, prevent, tolerate, spread, change, restore. These are the different type of functions or effects you can accommodate within adaptation strategies. And the final variable is the form. It can be structural, it can be legal, institutional, regulatory, financial, or technological adaptation strategies. After discussing all these, we will be discussing only three different types of adaptation strategies in details. One is reactive adaptation, responses taken after a climate or hazard impact has already occurred, mainly to cope with the damage that has happened. Second is the incremental adaptation, planned step by step adjustments that keep the same basic system but make it perform better under new climate conditions. And the third one is the transformational, deeper structural changes in where and how people live and produce when incremental options are no longer sufficient. There, these strategies are best. So, let us now discuss the reactive one, timing and trigger. We have already discussed the timing, and the trigger is often driven by emergency relief budgets, humanitarian aid, and the short decision windows. The characteristics, short term horizon, it restores the basic functions quickly back to normal rather than questioning if normal is still safe. Frequently based on existing practices and local knowledges, informal rest plans, changing sowing dates, etc. Strong role of political pressure and media after a disaster is very common in these reactive adaptation strategies. Sudden spending on visible measures we can find often. Policy or planning pattern, post disaster reconstruction using the same standards and land use patterns, build back similar, not build back better, emergency subsidies, relief packages, ad hoc infra repairs. This can also include some small safety upgrades like slightly higher planes, stronger roofing, but often without full risk analysis, primarily from the community side. There are certain plus of these reactive adaptation strategies. They can reduce immediate suffering and avoid cascading humanitarian crisis, which is very important, and sometimes reveals local adaptation options that were invisible before. The cons of these reactive adaptation strategies are that they depend heavily on post shock fiscal space. Poorest regions cannot afford reactive adaptation every time. Now we'll be discussing the second one, that's the incremental adaptation strategies. The timing is usually starts after risk is recognized through projections, risk maps, near misses, or moderate events. This is implemented through existing planning and investment cycles, building code revisions, infrastructure upgrades, 5-year plans. They are the best vehicle for these incremental adaptation strategies. The characteristics we can find step by step changes in standards and practices rather than complete overhauling. Works within the same development pathway, same city, same land use model, same economic base, but with more robust design. And these strategies are often guided by climate scenario. Design's term changed from 1 in 50 to 1 in 100 with the climate factor. That type of changes in the design, scenario design, we find. The instruments, updating design return periods, which I discussed just now, rolling programs for retrofitting, revising land use plans to slowly phase out new development in highest risk areas, adjusting agricultural calendars and varieties, water allocation rules, irrigation efficiency, etc. we can find. The pros are small steps allow monitoring and adjustments, adaptive management, and it's a good fit for uncertain climate projections, can be scaled up or down as we learn more. Cons are too slow compared to the speed of urbanization, and if exposure growth is very fast, incremental measures can't keep risk from the increasing. And the last one we'll be discussing, that is transformative adaptation strategies. When incremental measures cannot keep residual risk at an acceptable level, then it's a crisis. Or their cost becomes disproportionate, then we bring these transformative adaptation strategies. At least we discuss. Situations with deep uncertainty, non-linear thresholds or physical limits, such as low-lying deltas with long-term sea level rise, glacier-fed basins losing dry season flows, repeated failures of rain-fed agriculture in semi-arid regions, they are certain triggers for these transformative adaptation strategies. We can find its characteristics in the scale, which involves changes at system, sector, and landscape level, not just individual projects. The depth alters core function, locations, or identities of systems, where people live, what they produce, or how economies are structured. There has to be a governance shift as well. Needs new institutions, legal instruments, and financing, and often deliberate social dialogue, affected groups, rights, compensations. So the community, NGOs, they come in. Typical forms, we can see the spatial transformation, planned retreat or managed relocation of settlements from highly exposed coastal zones or floodplains or landslide areas, rezoning large areas, converting farmland or industrial land into permanent flood storage or wetland or forest, sectoral or economic transformation, moving from rain-fed monocropping to mixed climate resilient livelihood systems or even non-agricultural economic bases, shifting from water intensive industries to less climate sensitive sectors. And the institutional transformation, which is very basic for these transformative adaptation strategies, are something like new legal frameworks which are recognizing loss and damage, relocation rights, ecosystem rights, etc. Integrating climate risk into core macroeconomic and fiscal planning, and not just environment or DRR departments. The pros are, if done well, can break high risk, lock in, and open new, safer development pathways. And they often align strongly with sustainability goals, ecosystem restoration, social equity, long term viability, etc. The challenges or trade offs of these transformative adaptation strategies are politically sensitive, involves winners and losers, land acquisition, cultural identity, and livelihoods. High upfront planning and transaction costs requires strong state capacity and trust among the governance layers. Risk of maladaptation at larger scale if transformation reinforces inequality. Relocating only the poor, keeping prime safe land for elites. These are certain trade offs of these transformative adaptation strategies. Let us see now with some good graphics what they do mean. For heat, this can be the reactive adaptation. Temporary increase in frontline hospital services like accident and emergency capacity during heat wave. We have seen in this year only that hospital beds were increased during that heat wave period. Incremental adaptation, we can go for energy efficient ACs, and the cars can be like that, public transport, public buildings. So we can see this incremental adaptation. Whereas the transformative one will be having the, let's say, the health system innovations, urban green infrastructure, building codes that require cool roofs. So many other changes will be included into the program. For the flooding also we can do like this, that the reactive adaptation will be the placing sandbags so that we can divert the flood water. What we can do as an incremental adaptation, we can go for a buffer for the construction. We can construct that buffer wall for the flood to be keeping away. And what we can do in the transformative, we can shift that room, that house can be shifted somewhere else, or it can be a floating house. We bring the technology. So these are the transformative adaptation. So with this, we complete this adaptation and mitigation lecture. These are the references, and thank you.